what's going on in chapter 18 actually starts in chapter 16, verse 9. Okay, that's when the seventh seal. But let me give you some background of why chapter 18 happens. The origin actually goes, of course, all the way back to Genesis. Chapter 17, the origin of chapter 17 went back to the garden with Adam and Eve making fig leaves for themselves. That's false religion. Okay? Chapter 18 begins, or results out of, is a better way to put it, chapter 10 of Genesis. Chapter 10, verse 9 and 10, talking about a man named Nimrod. Okay? He was a mighty hunter in defiance of the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter in defiance of the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Okay? So what are we saying there? Many translations, the newer translations, meaning even in 1600, would say he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Before that, the translation said he was a mighty hunter in defiance of the Lord. What did Nimrod do? Nimrod built Babel from the Tower of Babel fame. The word Babel comes from two words, Bav, meaning gate, and El, meaning God. Babel means gateway to the gods. And that was the purpose of the tower, to reach up to God. This is the beginning of the city of Babylon. Babylon, of course, is where the tower was built. That's 55 miles southwest of modern-day Baghdad. It's just ruins today. But 3,000 years ago, it was a world center. Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt the Tower of Babel and called it Et Menanche, meaning the building which is the foundation of heaven and earth. They saw that building and the religion that went along with it as the foundation of heaven and earth. How does that impact us today? It impacts us in a big way. Chapter 17 is about Adam and Eve in the garden with fig leaves. Chapter 18 is about Nimrod being in defiance of the Lord. And that means this: the lost world is made up of two kingdoms. Both try to fill the human heart by replacing the one true God with either false religion or the pursuit of money and possessions or a worldly lifestyle, often called materialism in our day. And this materialism tries to satisfy and fill the human heart. We know, of course, it can't do that. God describes both false religions. Genesis 3, trying to appease to God through works, and the false religion of materialism. God calls that sexual immorality or immorality in Genesis 18. Ecclesiastes 3 says, He, being God, has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart. What does that mean, put eternity into man's heart? Excuse me. He has made, it means he has put in man's heart a knowledge that there is an eternity past this world and a desire to know the God of that eternity. That's in man's heart. That's why there are so many false religions in the world. They're trying to get to God on the wrong road of works. And that's what false religion is. Some false religions admit you can't make it, like Hinduism and Buddhism, which is a fork off of Hinduism. And that's where they get reincarnation. You just keep coming back over and over and over. But you never ever make it in those belief systems. So what does this mean to us today? What this means to us today is Revelation 18 is a judgment on materialism of the world. The economic system and the love for the world and the things of the world is what Revelation 18 is about. 17 was on false religions. 18 is the economic system or materialism of the world. And how does this happen? How in the world does this happen? We start in Revelation 6. The seventh bowl. Remember there were 7 bowls. We went through each bowl. Then there's a little gap. Then there's the 7th bowl. Revelation 16, 17 through 21. The 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." What does that mean? That means the judgment is going to happen right away. Remember, when John saw this revelation, chapter 16, verse 9 through the end of chapter 18, isn't very long. As long as it takes you to read it is how long he saw that. What confuses us sometimes is we go through chapter 16, next week we do 17, next week we do 18. We see a long period. But when he saw this, there wasn't a long period. So when he says it is done, chapter 18 is just happening a couple minutes later. Maybe 3 minutes. As long as it takes you to read 48 verses is how long it took them to say that, to go through this. So he says, the angel, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake such as had never been since the man was on earth. So great was the earthquake. That affects chapter 18. We're going to see that in a minute. The great city was split in 3 parts. The cities of the nations fell, and God thought about Babylon again to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his angry punishment. And every island, now this is because of the earthquake, and every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. Now think about this. They've had this big earthquake. It's worldwide. It levels everything. We see earthquakes in California, and it knocks a few buildings over, or breaks a bridge, messes up an interstate. But this is the biggest earthquake in the history of the world. Go back to Revelation 6 for just a minute. Verse 16. The leaders of the world, the rich people, the generals, the prime minister, the presidents, they're hiding in caves. And they're begging the mountains to fall on them. It says, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of the wrath has come, and who can stand? What's this saying? In Revelation 6, they wanted the mountains to fall on them. In Revelation 16, the mountains do fall on them. God hears what they said and says, fine, we'll do it. So we've got this big earthquake. So that earthquake affects all of Revelation 18 as we go through this. Verse 1 of 18. And I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a place for demons to live, a stronghold for every unclean spirit, a stronghold for every unclean bird, a stronghold for every unclean and detestable beast. What is going on here? Well, when the angel said in Revelation 16, it is done, 16 verse 17, he said it is done. Right after that, chapter 18, a bright angel comes out of heaven, having great authority, and the entire earth is brightened with his glory. And he calls out with a loud voice, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Isaiah 21:9, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. Now let's understand that we're in a vision here. There's a lot of vivid imagery in the vision. It's talking about a city. But the city is not a city like people live in. The city is a belief system. It's the belief system of materialism that started in Genesis 10 that God is crushing and destroying. He judged false religion in chapter 17. In chapter 18, he's judging materialism. Materialism is love of money, love of possessions, love of the world, and a worldly lifestyle. And that materialism is going to be judged, it says, in less than 1 hour. And since we've been in Revelation, I've been trying to figure out how this 1 hour can happen. The 1 hour is because of the earthquake in chapter 16, verse 9. When the big earthquake hits, every city is leveled. London, New York, Los Angeles, Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, everything. Sydney, the entire world. Not only all the cities, all the mountains are flattened. The Rocky Mountains will be flat. The Himalayan mountains will be flat. All the islands will disappear. What does that mean? Hawaii will disappear. Everything is rocked when that earthquake hits. So let's see how that happens. Verse 3, because all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. What in the world does that sentence mean? Verse 3. It's talking about materialism, where people try to replace the place in their heart or fill the place in their heart reserved for God, and they try to fill it with money, possessions, love for the world, love for a worldly lifestyle. They can't fill it. They can only block the way into that, so it's harder for them to believe. God put it in the heart of man to know Him. Then another voice from heaven saying, "Come out from her, my people, so that you will not take part in her sins, so that you will not share in her plagues, since her sins are heaped as high as heaven." And God began thinking again about her past sins. What's going on here is, verse 4, God's calling people out of the world. Leviticus 26, come out from among them and be separate. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 17 or 18, come out from among them. Don't be materialistic. Don't love the world. Don't love money. Don't love possessions, because they blind you to your need for God. The command is to come out, because there's coming a day, and we'll see that in a few verses, there's coming a day when that will hit in that 1 hour, and we'll see how people respond. And God began thinking again about her past sins. Pay her back as she herself has paid others back, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup mixed. So let's look at this. The love of money. 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Many pains. It's the love of money that is a root. Money itself is not evil. Abraham was wealthy. David was wealthy. Solomon was wealthy. It's the love of money. Someone asked John D. Rockefeller, how much money does it take to make a man happy? And Rockefeller said $1 more. But you never get that $1, because when you get one, there's always another one you want if you love money. Matthew 6:24 in the Sermon on the Mount. No one can serve two masters, because either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Do not love the world. 1 John 2:15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. If you love the world, the love of God is not in you, meaning you're not saved. You cannot love the world and love God. For all that is in the world, the desires of the old nature, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away, along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. And what does he say about that? Come out of that belief system. Come out of that. Therefore go out from their midst and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing. Then I will welcome you. 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts honor Christ as Lord in your hearts. Who do you honor in your heart? Or better question would be, what do you honor in your heart? Do you honor money? Do you honor the world? Do you honor possessions? What do you honor in your heart? 1 Peter 3 says, but in your hearts honor Christ as Lord. Moving on to verse 7, as she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her the same amount of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I've sit as a queen. I am no widow, and I shall never see mourning. Because of this reason, her plagues will come in a single day. Death and mourning and famine. And she will be burned with fire, because the mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. When this verse 7 says, I sit as a queen, it means materialism sees itself as sitting as the queen of heaven. And I ask you, what do you honor in your heart? Materialism sees itself as all-powerful, all-sustaining, and self-satisfying. All of that is seen in materialism, and yet it fails you. It fails you. We're going to look at 3 areas that are judged by God in Revelation 18. The governments, the merchants, and the delivery system. Moving on to verse 9. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality, meaning they chose the world rather than choosing God, and lived in luxury with her, will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke as she burns. They will weep. They will stand far away in fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas. Alas is a term of grief. Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, because in a single hour your judgment has come. In 1 hour. How quick does an earthquake start and stop? It comes without warning. I remember the earthquake in 1964. Dad was sitting on the front porch, and I was standing on the sidewalk, and the ground started shaking, and it shook for 20 or 30 seconds. It was not a big earthquake, but it was widespread in the Midwest. And then it was over. It started, it stopped very quickly. In a single hour. Judgment comes unexpectedly. Judgment will come quickly. And judgment will be complete. The entire world will be judged with that earthquake. Why do they fear her torment? They fear because they participated in the sins of materialism. These are the people who are standing far away and they see smoke rising. Smoke rises because oftentimes when there's an earthquake, their fires break out because of electrical fires, and gas lines break and cause fires. That's where the fires come from. And they're wondering about themselves. Well, if that's what happened to that city, what's going to happen to me? I had a friend who was in an earthquake in Alaska in 1964, and the ground was just shaking, moving up and down 5 feet at a time, he said. Just like this. And that was only in Alaska. This earthquake is worldwide. And next we see the merchants, the sellers of the products. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. They don't have any cargo to sell after that earthquake. If they do, it's damaged. It'll be on clearance. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple, cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots and slaves, that is, human souls. The fruit for which your soul greatly desires has left you, and you have been lost, your brightness and glamour, never to be found again. This judgment on a materialistic system is complete. No one's going to gather together and restart. And the reason is because the judgment's done. It's not long till we get chapter 19 and things have changed. The merchants of these products, to gain from her wealth, stood far away in fear of torment, weeping aloud. The city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, because in a single hour, all this wealth, everything that people place an emphasis on, is gone. It's destroyed. This is not an earthquake that you recover from. And then the next is a delivery man. The entire system is judged. And all shipmasters and seafaring men and sailors and all whose trade is on the sea stood far away and cried out, "What is like the great city, the great belief system?" And they saw the smoke as she burned. And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, "Alas, alas!" Because the great city where all the ships at sea grew rich by her wealth, because in a single hour she has been destroyed and abandoned. 3 times it says in a single hour. In 1 hour the judgment comes. Anytime the Bible repeats something, there's a reason for it. We know from Jacob or Joseph's dream to Pharaoh. Joseph had the dream. It was repeated in a different form, and Joseph said to Pharaoh, "That means this has been determined in the heart of God. It's done. It's going to happen." Twice, it's done, going to happen. Third, it's right on top of us. This has been determined by God. This earthquake will happen. There is coming a day, and when it does happen, everything is destroyed. Verse 20 is the only verse up to this point in Revelation where believers are told to rejoice. "Rejoice over her, you heavens, and you saints, and apostles and prophets, because God has given judgment for you against her." Rejoice, be glad for the judgment. And then we look at the totality of the destruction. Beginning in verse 21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down with sudden violence. What does that mean? The angel picks up a great millstone. There's only one other time when a great millstone is mentioned. That's when someone offends a child. And the great millstone is thrown into the ocean, and they are tied to it, and it goes to the bottom of the ocean. There's no hope for those people. Don't waste your time with them. Be thrown down with sudden violence. What that means is when that millstone hits the water, the impact, that's the sudden violence it's talking about. It'll be that kind of thing. It'll be a complete shock. And will never be found again, meaning the belief system of materialism. And the sound of the harpists and musicians, the flute players and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. And no craftsman of any craft will ever be found in you again. And the sound of the mill will never be heard in you again. And the light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the bride and the bridegroom will never be heard in you again. Because your merchants, the great ones of earth, and all the nations were deceived by your sorcery, meaning deceived by materialism. Their eyes were blinded. And the blood of the prophets and the saints and all who have been slain on earth was discovered in her. So how do we respond to chapter 18? As we close, how do we respond to chapter 18? We respond by rejoicing that we're believers. We're on the winning team. Whether we go through the earthquake or whether we're taken out beforehand, doesn't really matter. We win. That's it. Chapter 19 is a whole different chapter. No more judgment in chapter 19, 20, 21, and 22. It's all good after that. So we rejoice. We also respond by wanting to tell others that Jesus is the only way. There's no other way. You cannot get to heaven through your works, through your money, or anything else. Are you ready for eternity? Let's pray.